the timeless warrior of Tewanganui. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get to the video. The gathering storm. The morning mist clung to the valleys of Tewanganui like the breath of ancient spirits, weaving through the towering peaks that stood sentinel over the sacred gathering grounds. It was the autumn of Fientios Tobenti, and the great wicked drawn Māori from across the North Island, chiefs and warriors, Tuhonga and Kuya, all converging on this hallowed place where their ancestors had met for countless generations. Rangi Tauhirimatea ajusted his feathered cloak as he descended the mountain path, his bare feet finding purchase on the dew-slicked stones with the confidence of one born to these lands. As a young warrior of Te Arawa, he had traveled for 3 days to reach this gathering, carrying with him the hopes and concerns of his evi. The political landscape of Aotearoa was shifting like sand. In a storm, the pale-skinned Tengata Wenua, from across the great waters, had established their settlements, bringing with them strange customs, powerful weapons, and an insatiable hunger for land. The sound of karakia drifted up from the valley below, mixing with the rhythmic beating of drums that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of Papatuanuku herself. Smoke from cooking fires created lazy spirals in the still air, carrying the rich aromas of hangi and the salt-sweet scent of the nearby coast. As Rangi crested the final ridge, the full scope of the gathering revealed itself. Hundreds of were dotted the valley floor, like seeds scattered by Tane, while the Wanganui River coved through the landscape like a great serpent of silver and jade. But it was not the impressive scale of the hui that caused Rangi to pause and catch his breath. There, in the center of the main gathering circle, stood a figure that seemed to command the very air around him. The warrior was tall and broad-shouldered, his moko spiraling across his face in patterns that spoke of high rank and ancient lineage. His stance was that of a man who had never known defeat. Feet planted firmly on the earth, as if he had grown from it, like the mighty kauri trees that crowned the distant hills. What struck Rangi most profoundly was not the warrior's obvious mana or the respectful distance that others maintained around him. It was something else entirely, a quality that defied easy description. The man seemed to exist slightly apart from the world around him, as if he occupied a space between the realm of the living and the domain of the ancestors. The late afternoon light fell across his features in a way that created deep shadows, making it difficult to discern his exact age or expression, yet his presence was unmistakable and commanding. As Rangi made his way down into the valley, he noticed how conversations seemed to quiet as the mysterious warrior passed, how even the most senior chiefs inclined their heads in acknowledgement. Children peered at him from behind their mother's skirts, with a mixture of awe and something approaching fear, while the elders watched him with eyes that held recognition, not of the man himself perhaps, but of something he represented. The formal proceedings of the hui began as the sun reached its zenith. Rangi found himself seated among the other young warriors, his attention divided between the speeches of the various chiefs and the enigmatic figure who seemed to drift through the gathering like smoke. The warrior participated in the discussions with a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority, speaking on matters of tradition and protocol with an intimate knowledge that suggested decades of experience. Yet his face remained unlined, his movements possessed of a vitality that belonged to a man in his prime. Chief Tamatiwaka Nene of Nachihau rose to address the assembly, his words carrying across the valley with the force of thunder. He spoke of the changing times, of the need for unity among the Iwi in the face of growing pressure from the European settlers. His speech was punctuated by calls of agreement from the crowd, but Rangi noticed that the mysterious warrior remained silent, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the mountains. As the day wore on, Rangi found himself increasingly fascinated by this enigmatic presence. During the ceremonial haka, that marked the formal conclusion of the day's proceedings, the warrior's movements were fluid and precise, each gesture carrying a power that seemed to resonate in the very bones of those who watched. His voice, when it joined the collective chant, added a depth and resonance that transformed the entire performance into something transcendent. That evening, as cooking fires were lit and the community settled into the rhythms of shared meals and storytelling, Rangi approached one of the elder women from his own iwi. Kuya Mere had attended more than anyone could count, her memory stretching back to the days before the first European ships had appeared on the horizon. Kuya, Rangi said, settling beside her as she tended to the Hanyi, who is the warrior who stands apart. The one with the moko that speaks of ancient lines? Mere's hands stilled in their work, and she looked up at him with eyes that held depths of knowledge accumulated over many decades. "Ah, young Rangi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have noticed him too. That is a question with no easy answer." She glanced around to ensure they would not be overheard, then continued, "I have seen that man at gatherings for more years than I care to count. My grandmother spoke of him, and her grandmother before her. Always the same face, the same bearing, the same ageless strength. Some say is Tangata Wenua in the truest sense, one who belongs to the land so completely that time itself cannot touch him." Rangi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "But that's impossible, Kuya. No man lives for generations on change." Mere's weathered fingers traced patterns in the dirt beside the fire. "Is it impossible, child? Our ancestors speak of many things that the modern world would call impossible. Persuis is one of the old ones, a guardian spirit made of flesh to watch over us in these times of change. Persuis is something else entirely. All I know is that his presence at a gathering is considered both a blessing and a portent." As if summoned by their conversation, the warrior appeared at the edge of the firelight. Up close, Rangi could see that his moko was indeed of an ancient style, the spirals and curves following patterns that spoke of lineages stretching back to the very beginning of Māori presence in Aotearoa. His eyes, when they met Rangi's, seemed to hold depths that no mortal gaze should possess. "Kia ora, young warrior," the man said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Rangi's chest. "I am Kahu. I have been watching you today, and I sense that you carry questions that burn like fire in your heart." Rangi struggled to find his voice, overwhelmed by the intensity of the man's presence. "Kia ora, Kahu. I was wondering about your Ravi, your Wakapapa. I don't recognize the patterns of your moko." Kahu's lips curled in what might have been a smile, though the shadows made it difficult to be certain. "My Waka Papa is written in the land itself, young one. My Wiwi are all the people of Aotearoa, and my allegiance is to the preservation of our ways in times of great change." Before Rangi could formulate another question, Kahu had melted back into the darkness beyond the firelight, leaving only the faint scent of native flax and something else, something wild and untamed, that spoke of deep forests and hidden valleys where the old ways still held sway. That night, as Rangi lay in his weir, listening to the night sounds of the valley, he found sleep elusive. The image of Kahu remained vivid in his mind, the warrior's commanding presence, his ageless features, and most disturbing of all, the sense that he was looking at something that existed outside the normal flow of time. As the hours passed and the stars wheeled overhead, Rangi began to understand that this gathering would mark the beginning of a mystery that would haunt him for the rest of his days. In the distance, a morpor called through the darkness, its cry echoing off the valley walls like the voice of the ancestors themselves. And somewhere in that sound, Rangi thought he could hear an answer to questions he had not yet learned to ask. A promise that the truth about the timeless warrior would reveal itself, but only to those brave enough to seek it in the spaces between legend and reality. 3 days into the gathering, Rangi found himself drawn to the makeshift archive that had been established in one of the larger ware. Here, the Tohonga and learned elders had assembled a collection of carved panels, woven tapestries, and painted hides that chronicled the history of the various iwi represented, at the Wii. It was a tradition at such gatherings to share the visual records of their people, allowing the younger generation to learn from the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors. The morning light filtered through the woven walls as Rangi examined a particularly intricate carving that depicted a great battle from generations past. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each figure rendered with such detail that they seemed ready to step from the wood and resume their eternal struggle. As his eyes traced the flowing lines of the composition, something made him pause and look more closely. There, among the warriors frozen in their moment of glory, was a face that sent a shock of recognition through his entire being. The features were unmistakable, the same strong jaw, the same piercing eyes, the same distinctive moko patterns that he had observed on Kahu just days before. But this carving, according to the inscription carved beneath it, depicted events that had occurred nearly 50 years ago. Remarkable work, isn't it? Rangi spun around to find an elderly Tuhunga named Wairmo studying him with knowing eyes. The old man's own moko spoke of great learning and spiritual authority, and his presence commanded immediate respect. This carving, Rangi said, his voice tight with confusion. The warrior here, in the center of the battle. Ah, you've noticed him too, Wairmo said, moving closer to examine the panel. That figure has appeared in our historical records with disturbing frequency, always in moments of great significance, always unchanged by the passage of time. Wairmo gestured for Rangi to follow him deeper into the archive, where older and more precious artifacts were carefully preserved. Come, young warrior, there is something you should see. They stopped before a painted hide that bore the unmistakable signs of great age. The pigments had faded to earth tones, and the material itself was so delicate that it seemed it might crumble at a touch. Yet the images it bore were still clearly visible, a ceremonial gathering not unlike the one they were currently attending, with figures arranged in formal poses around a central fire. This depicts the great gathering of the Cientoatiente. Wairmo explained, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. My grandfather's grandfather was present at that way, and he commissioned this record to preserve the memory of what was decided there. Rangi's blood turned to ice water in his veins. There, painted with meticulous care in the center of the composition, was the same figure he had seen in the carving, and the same man he had spoken with beside the fire just 2 nights before. The face was identical in every detail, from the patterns of the moko to the set of the shoulders, to the way the light seemed to gather around him, as if he were a lodestone for illumination itself. But this is impossible, Rangi breathed, his worldview cracking like thin ice under the weight of undeniable evidence. No man could appear unchanged across decades of time. Wairmo's weathered hand came to rest on Rangi's shoulder. You speak of impossibility, young one, but you do so from the perspective of one who has forgotten the true nature of our world. Before the coming of the Tangata Wenwa from across the sea, before their rigid ideas about what is real and what is not, our people understood that existence has many layers, many depths that cannot be measured by the simple passage of season. The Tohunga led him to yet another artifact, a series of small carved figures arranged on a woven mat. Each figure was unique, representing different aspects of Maori spiritual belief. But one among them drew Rangi's attention like a magnet draws iron. It was a representation of Kahu, carved with such precision that it captured not only his physical appearance, but something of his essential nature, the sense of existing between worlds, of being both present and absent simultaneously. This figure, Wairmo said, noting Rangi's fixation, represents what our ancestors called a Kaitiaki Tangata, a guardian spirit who takes human form to watch over the people during times of great change or danger. Such beings are said to exist outside the normal flow of time, appearing when they are most needed to guide or protect. Rangi picked up the small carving, feeling its weight in his palm. The wood was smooth and warm, as if it had been recently handled, yet he could sense the age within it, decades, perhaps centuries of accumulated mana flowing through the grain. Are you saying that Kahu is not human? Rangi asked, though even as he spoke the words, He realized that some part of him had already accepted this possibility. I am saying that the categories of human and not human may be too simple to encompass the full reality of what walks among us. Wayarmu replied, "Our ancestors understood that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than it appears on the surface. They knew that some beings exist in the spaces between what we call real and what we call spirit, serving purposes that span generations." As if to emphasize his point, a commotion arose from outside the where. Voices were raised in excitement, and the sound of running feet suggested that something significant was happening. Rangi and Wadwe emerged into the bright afternoon light to find a crowd gathering around a group of newly arrived visitors. The newcomers were from a distant Tiwi, their journey having taken them many days across difficult terrain. Their leader, a chief named Honi, was speaking rapidly to the assembled crowd, his words carrying an urgency that commanded immediate attention. "We bring word from the southern settlements," Honi announced, his voice carrying across the valley. "The Tangata Wenwa have signed papers with some of our chiefs. Papers that they claim give them ownership of vast tracts of our ancestral lands. There is talk of war, of resistance, of alliances that must be forged if we are to preserve our way of life." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd, but before anyone could respond, Kahu stepped forward from the shadows where he had been standing unnoticed. His presence immediately commanded attention, and the crowd fell silent as he approached the messenger. "Tell me, Juani of the Southern Niwi," Kahu said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air, "what manner of papers do these strangers wave about like weapons? What power do they claim these marks upon bark possess?" Juani's expression grew troubled as he met Kahu's gaze. "They call them treaties, and they say that by making marks upon them, our chiefs have agreed to sell the land itself, not just the right to use it, but the very earth that holds the bones of our ancestors." A collective gasp, ours from the assembled crowd. The concept that was so foreign, so fundamentally opposed to Maori understanding of the relationship between people and land, that many struggled to comprehend it. Land could no more be sold than the sky or the wind. It was not a possession but a relationship, not property but wakapapa. Kahu's expression darkened, and for a moment Randy could have sworn he saw something inhuman flicker behind the warrior's eyes, something ancient and terrible and utterly implacable. "Then the time of choosing has come," Kahu said, his words seeming to carry the weight of prophecy. "Our people must decide whether they will preserve the old ways or surrender them to those who see the world as nothing more than something to be owned and exploited." As the crowd began to disperse into smaller groups, each discussing the implications of this news, Rangi found himself once again drawn to Kahu's presence. But when he looked around, the mysterious warrior had vanished as completely as if he had never been there at all. That evening, as the hui continued with increased urgency and purpose, Rangi sat by his fire and contemplated the evidence that had been laid before him. The carvings, the paintings, the small wooden figure that still rested warm in his palm, all pointed to a truth that challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, a figure moved with the silence of shadow itself, watching over the gathered people as he had for generations, uncounted. And in that watching, in that eternal vigilance, lay both a promise and a warning that would echo through the years to come. The revelation of the land treaties cast a shadow over the remaining days of the gathering, transforming what had begun as a celebration of unity into a council of war. Chiefs who had arrived with thoughts of trade and ceremony now found themselves grappling with questions that would determine the very survival of their way of life. A great meeting circle, which had previously echoed with songs and stories, now resonated with heated debates that stretched long into the night. Rangi found himself caught between his growing obsession with the mystery of Kahu and the urgent political realities that demanded his attention. As a young warrior, his Iwi would expect him to return with clear understanding of the alliances being forged and the strategies being discussed. Yet it could not shake the feeling that the enigmatic figure who moved through the gathering like a living ghost held keys to understanding that went far beyond the immediate crisis. On the fourth morning, as mist rose from the Wanganui River like the breath of sleeping Taniwha, Rangi made his way to the water's edge to perform his dawn karakia. The ritual cleansing had always brought him peace, but today his mind remained troubled, choring with questions that seemed to multiply rather than resolve with each passing hour. As he knelt by the water's edge, letting the cold current flow over his hands, he became aware of another presence. Kahu stood a short distance upstream, his own morning prayers completed, watching the interplay of light and shadow on the moving water with an expression of profound contemplation. "The river remembers everything," Kahu said without turning, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of the current. "Every tear that has fallen into its waters, every drop of blood that has stained its banks, every joy that has been celebrated on its shores. It is a keeper of memory, flowing always toward the sea, but never forgetting its source." Rangi rose and approached cautiously, still uncertain how to address this being who seemed to exist between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit. "Kahu," he said, "I have been thinking about what I saw in the archive yesterday. The carvings, the paintings." "You have questions, Kahu," interrupted, finally turning to face. In the early morning light, his features seemed even more ageless than before, as if the dawn itself were reluctant to reveal the full truth of what he was. "Questions that burn in your mind like fire in dry grass. Ask them, young warrior. The time for half-truths and comfortable ignorance is ending." Rangi took a deep breath, steeling himself for answers that might shatter his understanding of the world. "Are you the same man who appears in those historical records? The same warrior who stood in battles fought before my grandfather was born?" Kahu's lips curved in what might have been a smile, though there was no humor in it, only a sadness that seemed to encompass centuries of accumulated loss. "I am what I have always been," he said. "A guardian, a witness, a keeper of the old ways in times when those ways are threatened with extinction. I am bound to this land and its people by ties that transcend the simple passage of years." "But how is that possible?" Rangi pressed, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. "How can you exist unchanged while generations pass like seasons?" Kahu gestured toward the river where the morning light was beginning to burn away the mist. "Tell me, young one, does the river age? Does it grow old and die as mortal beings do? Or does it simply continue, always itself, yet always changing, carrying the waters of countless streams toward their destiny in the sea?" The analogy struck Rangi with the force of revelation, yet it raised as many questions as it answered. "You're saying that you're like the river, eternal, unchanging." "I am saying that existence has many forms, many expressions," Kahu replied. "What you call eternal, I experience as responsibility. What you see as unchanging, I feel as the weight of countless memories, countless moments of joy and sorrow, witnessed and preserved. I do not age because I am not bound by the same laws that govern mortal flesh. I do not die because my purpose is not yet complete." As if to emphasize his words, a flight of tui burst from the trees along the river bank, their calls creating a symphony of liquid notes that seemed to speak of mysteries beyond human comprehension. Kahu watched them with an expression of infinite tenderness, as if each bird carried within it a memory precious beyond measure. "What is your purpose?" Rangi asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "To preserve," Kahu said simply, "to remember, to ensure that the wisdom of our ancestors is not lost in the flood of change that threatens to sweep away everything our people have built over countless generations." The Tangata Wenua from across the sea bring with them not just new ways of living, but new ways of thinking, ways that see the world as something to be conquered rather than something to be cherished. He turned to face Rangi directly, and in his eyes the young warrior saw depths that spoke of experiences spanning centuries. "They do not understand that the land is not property to be owned," But Wakapapa, to be honest, they cannot comprehend that the forests and rivers and mountains are not resources to be exploited, but ancestors to be respected, and in their ignorance, they threaten to destroy not just our way of life, but the very foundations upon which that life is built. The sound of voices from the main gathering area reminded them both that the day's formal proceedings would soon begin. As they walked back toward the heart of the Hui, Rangi found himself struggling to process everything he had learned. The revelation that Kahu was something more than human should have been impossible to accept, yet somehow it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle he had been trying to solve his entire life. "Why are you telling me this?" Rangi asked as they approached the edge of the main gathering circle. "Why reveal yourself to me when you have remained hidden for so long?" Kahu paused, his hand coming to rest on Rangi's shoulder with a weight that seemed to carry the authority of the earth itself. "Because the time of hiding is ending, young warrior. The challenges that face our people in the coming years will require more than human strength to overcome. They will require the wisdom of the ancestors, the power of the old ways, and the courage of those willing to stand between the darkness and the light." Before Rangi could ask what he meant, the morning's formal proceedings began with the sound of the conch shell, calling the assembly to order. Chiefs and warriors, Tohonga and Kuya, all gathered in the great circle to continue their deliberations about the crisis facing their people. But as Rangi took his place among the other young warriors, his attention was divided between the urgent discussions taking place around him and the profound implications of what he had just learned. Throughout the day, as speaker after speaker rose to address the assembly, Rangi found himself watching Kahu with new eyes. The mysterious warrior participated in the discussions with the same authority as before, but now Rangi could see the subtle ways in which his presence influenced the proceedings. When tensions rose too high, Kahu's voice would cut through the discord with words that restored balance. When despair threatened to overwhelm the gathering, his quiet confidence would remind everyone that their ancestors had faced similar challenges and prevailed. As the sun reached its zenith and the formal sessions paused for the midday meal, Rangi realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in the history of his people. The timeless guardian who had watched over them in secret for generations was finally stepping forward into the light, preparing to play a more active role in the struggles to come. The thought filled him with both hope and terror, for if Kahu felt compelled to reveal himself after centuries of hidden guardianship, it could only mean that the challenges facing the Maori people were greater than anyone had yet imagined. The fifth day of the gathering dawned grey and ominous, with heavy clouds rolling in from the Tasman Sea like harbingers of the storm that was brewing across all of Aotearoa. The political discussions had grown increasingly urgent, as more messengers arrived with news from distant settlements, stories of land seizures, of conflicts between Maori and European settlers, traditional authority structures being challenged by the promises and threats of colonial administrators. Rangi woke before dawn, his sleep having been troubled by dreams of battles yet to come, and faces from the past that seemed to watch him with eyes full of warning. As he emerged from his weir, he found the gathering grounds already stirring with activity despite the early hour. The atmosphere had changed palpably overnight, where there had been the energy of celebration and reunion. Now there was the tense anticipation of a people preparing for war. In the center of the main gathering circle, a new structure had been erected during the night, a car post that rose toward the grey sky like a challenge to the heavens themselves. The carving was unlike anything Rangi had seen before, its spirring patterns seeming to shift and flow in the uncertain light. At its base sat Kahu, his presence more commanding than ever, as if the revelation of his true nature had freed him from the need to conceal his power. Around him, the Mosenor chiefs and Tohonga are gathered in a tight circle, their voices low but urgent as they discussed matters of the gravest importance. Rangi approached cautiously, uncertain whether his presence would be welcome at such a high-level consultation, but Kahu's eyes found his across the circle, and he gestured for the young warrior to join them. "Rangi tauhirimatia," Kahu said, his voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. Your timing is fortuitous. We have been discussing the need for messengers, young warriors who can carry word of our decisions to the iwi who could not attend this gathering. Your iwi, Te Arawa, controls territory that will be crucial in the struggles to come. Chief Tamati Wakanene looked up from the card map that had been spread on the ground between them. The situation is more dire than we initially understood, he said, his weathered face grave with concern. The Europeans are not content with the coastal settlements they have already established. They speak of bringing thousands more of their people to our shores, of transforming our entire land into something that serves their purposes rather than ours. An elderly Tohunga named Hone added his voice to the discussion. They do not understand the spiritual significance of what they seek to claim. To them, the land is merely dirt and rock, to shaped according to their will. They cannot comprehend that every hill and valley, every river and forest, is part of a living web of relationships that has existed since the time of creation. Kahu's hand traced patterns on the carrel post beside him, and Randy noticed that the wood seemed to respond to his touch, the spirals appearing to pulse with an inner light. The immediate question, Kahu said, is whether our people will unite in resistance or allow themselves to be divided by the promises and threats of the colonial administrators. Some chiefs have already been seduced by the goods and status offered in exchange for their cooperation. Others speak of adapting to the new reality rather than fighting against it. And what do you counsel? Asked Tewerohero, a chief whose mana was respected throughout the North Island. You have seen more of our history than any of us. You have witnessed the rise and fall of Iwi, the ebb and flow of power across our lands. What wisdom do the ancestors offer for these unprecedented times? Kahu was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the mountains that ringed the valley. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of prophecy. The ancestors speak of cycles, he said. Times of peace followed by times of conflict, periods of unity followed by periods of division. But they also speak of moments when the very nature of existence is challenged, when the old ways must either adapt or perish entirely. He rose to his feet, his movement fluid and graceful despite the gravity of his words. We stand at such a moment now. The Tangata winner from across the sea do not merely seek to conquer our land. They seek to transform our entire understanding of what it means to exist in relationship with the world around us. They would make us into something we have never been, a people who see ourselves as separate from and superior to the natural world that sustains us. The circle of chiefs and elders listened in profound silence as Kahu continued. If we are to preserve not just our political independence but our spiritual integrity, we must be willing to fight for more than territory. We must be willing to fight for the very soul of what it means to be Tangata Winwa, people of the land. As if summoned by his words, a new commotion arose from the edge of the gathering grounds. A group of riders was approaching at speed, their horses lathered with sweat, and their faces grim with urgency. The lead rider bore the markings of Ngati Tuhwe Rotoa, and as he dismounted and approached the circle of chiefs, his news confirmed their worst fears. Fighting has broken out in the Bay of Islands, the messenger announced, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent gathering. A chief named Soneheki has cut down the British flag at Flagstaff Hill for the second time. The colonial authorities have declared him a rebel and are gathering forces to crush what they call an insurrection. A murmuring excitement and concern rippled through the crowd that had gathered to hear the news. Honeheke was known throughout the North Island as a chief of great mana and fierce independence. If he had chosen the path of open resistance, it meant that the time for diplomatic solutions was rapidly coming to an end. Kahu stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. Then the choice has been made for us, he said, his voice carrying with it the authority of centuries. The colonial authorities have shown that they will not tolerate even symbolic resistance to their authority. They seek not accommodation but submission, not partnership but dominance. He turned to address the full assembly, his words ringing out across the valley like a call to arms. My people, the time of decision is upon us. We can submit to the demands of those who would remake our world in their image, or we can stand together in defense of everything our ancestors held sacred. The choice is ours, but we must make it now, while we still have the strength to make it matter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Warriors leaped to their feet with cries of support, their weapons raised toward the gray sky. Chiefs, who had been uncertain about the path forward, now spoke with one voice in favor of resistance. Even the women and elders, who traditionally counsel caution in matters of war, seemed to understand that this conflict would determine not just the political future of their people, but their very survival as a distinct culture. As the gathering erupted in preparations for war, Rangi found himself swept up in the tide of events that seemed to be moving with the inexorable force of destiny itself. But even as he joined his voice to the war cries that echoed across the valley, his eyes remained fixed on Kahu, who stood at the center of the storm like a figure carved from stone. For the first time since their conversation by the river, Rangi began to understand the true weight of what the timeless guardian carried. It was not just the responsibility of watching over his people through the normal cycles of conflict and peace, but the burden of guiding them through a transformation that would either preserve their essential nature or destroy it entirely. As the day wore on and the plans for resistance took shape, Rangi realized that he was witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. The gathering at Te Wanganui would be remembered not just as a hui where important decisions were made, but as the moment when the Māori people chose to fight for their very souls. And at the center of it all stood the warrior who appeared in every old paint, no longer hidden in shadow, but revealed at last as what he had always been. A guardian spirit made flesh, a keeper of the old ways, and a bridge between the world of the ancestors and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The final night of the gathering arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the earth. Despite the fires that burned throughout the valley, despite the warmth generated by hundreds of bodies gathered in common purpose, there was a coldness in the air that spoke of endings and beginnings, of old certainties crumbling and new realities struggling to be born. Rangi sat beside his fire, ostensibly preparing his weapons for the journey home, but actually lost in contemplation of everything that had transpired over the past 6 days. The world he had known when he first descended into the valley seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a reality far stranger and more complex than he had ever imagined possible. Around him, the other warriors were engaged in similar preparations, their conversations a mixture of excitement and apprehension as they contemplated the conflicts to come. Some spoke with the bravado of the youth, eager to prove themselves in battle against the colonial forces. Others, older and more experienced, understood that the war they were preparing to fight would be unlike any their people had ever faced. Not just a conflict over territory or resources, but a struggle for the very right to exist as they had for countless generations. As the evening deepened and the stars emerged from behind the dissipating clouds, a different kind of gathering began to take shape. Moving quietly through the shadows between the fires, figures began to converge on a secluded grove at the edge of the valley, a place where the ancient trees grew so thick that even the starlight could barely penetrate their canopy. Rangi felt the pull of that gathering, like a physical force drawing him away from his fire and his companions towards something that promised answers to questions he was only beginning to formulate. As he made his way through the darkness, he realized that he was not alone. Other figures moved through the night with the same purposeful silence, all drawn toward the same mysterious destination. The grove, when he reached it, was unlike any place he had ever experienced. The trees that surrounded the small clearing were ancient beyond measure, their trunks so massive that it would take a dozen men holding hands to encircle them. Their branches intertwined overhead to form a natural cathedral, while their roots created a complex network beneath a forest floor that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. In the center of the clearing stood Kahu, but he was transformed from the figure Rangi had come to know over the past days. Here, in this place of power, his true nature was fully revealed. He seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with fire or starlight, and the very air around him shimmered with energies that made the hair on Rangi's arms stand on end. Around him, arranged in a perfect circle, were others who shared his otherworldly nature. Rangi recognized some of them as figures he had noticed at the gathering, individuals who had seemed somehow apart from the crowd, who had moved through the proceedings with the same timeless quality that marked Kahu himself. Now, revealed in their true forms, they were clearly beings of power and ancient wisdom, guardians who had watched over the Māori people since time immemorial. "Welcome, chosen ones," Kahu said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the earth. "You have been called here because the time of hiding is ending. The challenges that face our people in the years to come will require more than human strength to overcome. They will require the active intervention of those who have been content to watch from the shadows." As Rangi's eyes adjusted to the strange light that filled the grove, he began to recognize others among the assembled figures. There was Wairmu, the Tohonga who had shown him the ancient artifacts, but now revealed as something far more than a learned elder. There were warriors he had noticed at the gathering, women whose wisdom had seemed to transcend normal human understanding, even children whose eyes had held depths that belonged to beings far older than their apparent years. "For generations," Kahu continued, "we have maintained the balance between the world of spirit and the world of flesh, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancestors remained alive in the hearts of the people. We have been the keepers of memory, the guardians of tradition, the bridge between what was and what must be." One of the other guardians, a woman whose moko spoke of lineages that stretched back to the very beginning of time, stepped forward. "But now that balance is threatened as never before," she said, her voice carrying the authority of countless generations. "The Tangata Wenwa from across the sea bring with them not just new ways of living, but new ways of thinking that threaten to sever the connection between our people and the spiritual foundations of their existence." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled guardians, and Rangi realized that he was witnessing a council of beings whose existence spanned centuries, whose memories encompassed the entire history of Maori presence in Aotearoa. The weight of that realization was almost overwhelming, yet he found himself strangely calm, as if his presence here was not an accident, but the fulfillment of a destiny he had been moving toward his entire life. "The question before us," Kahu said, his gaze sweeping across the circle of guardians, "is whether we continue to work in secret, guiding events from the shadows as we have always done, or whether we step forward into the light and take a more active role in the struggles to come." An elderly guardian whose form seemed to shift and flow like smoke spoke next. "The risks of revelation are enormous," he said. "If our people learn of our true nature, it could shatter their understanding of the world. If our enemies discover what we are, they will seek to destroy us with weapons both physical and spiritual. Yet the risks of remaining hidden may be even greater," countered another guardian, this one appearing as a young warrior whose eyes held the wisdom of ages. "The colonial authorities do not merely seek to conquer our land, they seek to transform our people into something they have never been. If we do not act, we may preserve our secret existence only to watch everything we have sworn to protect disappear forever." The debate continued for what felt like hours, with each guardian contributing their perspective on the momentous decision that faced them. Rangi listened in fascination, beginning to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented in the history of his people, a moment when the hidden guardians who had watched over them for generations were being forced to choose between secrecy and survival. Finally, Kahu raised his hand for silence. "The decision cannot be made by the battle alone," he said. "It requires a deeper understanding of what the future holds, a vision that transcends the immediate crisis and encompasses the long-term survival of our people and our way of life." Eje stood toward the center of the circle, where the forest floor was covered with intricate patterns that seemed to have been carved into the earth itself. As Rangi watched, those patterns began to glow with the same inner light that surrounded the guardians, creating a mandala of power that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth itself. "We will seek guidance from the ancestors," Kahu announced. "We will open the pathways between the worlds and ask for the wisdom of those who have walked this path before us. But know this, once we take this step, there will be no turning back. The future of our people and our role in shaping that future will be decided tonight." As the guardians began to chant in voices that seemed to come from the very foundations of creation, Rangi felt himself being drawn into something far greater than his individual existence. The patterns on the ground blazed with increasing intensity, and the air itself seemed to thicken with power that made his skin tingle and his heart race. In that moment, suspended between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit, Rangi began to understand that his presence at the gathering had been no accident. He had been chosen, called to witness this moment of decision, not as an observer, but as a participant in events that would reshape the very nature of existence for his people. The chanting reached a crescendo, and suddenly the grove was filled with presences that had no physical form, the spirits of ancestors stretching back through countless generations, their voices joining the chorus of the guardians in a harmony that seemed to encompass all of creation. And in that moment of perfect unity between past, present, and future, the decision was made. The guardians would step forward into the light, revealing themselves to chosen individuals among their people and taking an active role in the struggles to come. The age of hidden watching was ending, and the age of open guardianship was about to begin. As the power slowly faded from the grove and the ancestral presences withdrew back into the realm of spirit, Rangi found himself forever changed by what he had witnessed. He was no longer simply a young warrior of Te Arawa, but a keeper of secrets that would shape the destiny of his people for generations to come. The morning of departure dawned clear and bright, as if the earth itself sought to wash away the shadows of the previous night's revelation. The gathering grounds, which had been home to hundreds of people for nearly a week, now bustled with the organized chaos of departure, as he would prepare to return to their home territories, carrying with them the decisions and alliances forged at Te Wanganui. Rangi moved through his morning preparations with mechanical precision, his mind still reeling from the events in the grove. The memory of what he had witnessed felt almost dreamlike in the harsh light of day, yet the weight of the knowledge he now carried was all too real. He was no longer simply a messenger, returning home with news of political developments. He was a keeper of secrets that could reshape his people's understanding of their own existence. As he secured his pack and prepared his weapons for the journey ahead, he became aware of Kahu approaching through the dispersing crowd. In the daylight, the mysterious warrior appeared once again, as he had throughout the gathering, commanding and ageless, but seemingly human. Only Rangi's inherent awareness allowed him to perceive the subtle signs of his true nature, the way shadows seemed to bend around him, the manner in which his footsteps left no impression on the soft earth, the quality of light that gathered around him, as if he were a lodestone for illumination itself. "The time has come for farewells," Kahu said, his voice carrying the same harmonics that had filled the grove the night before, though muted now to levels that would not attract unwanted attention. "Your journey home will be more significant than you yet realize. Young warrior, the knowledge you carry will be tested in ways you cannot imagine." Rangi shouldered his pack and faced the being who had become both mentor and mystery over the course of the gathering. "Will I see you again?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Kahu's lips curved in that enigmatic expression that might have been a smile. "You will see me whenever the need is greatest," he replied. "That is the nature of guardianship, to appear when and where we are most needed, regardless of the passage of time or the distance between places. The bond that has been forged between us transcends the normal limitations of mortal existence." As if to demonstrate his words, Kahu reached into his cloak and withdrew a small carved pendant, a spiral of greenstone that seemed to capture and hold the morning light in its depths. "Carry this," he said, placing it in Rangi's palm. "It will serve as a reminder of what you have learned here, and as a beacon for those who share our purpose. When the time comes for the guardians to reveal themselves more fully, you will know." The pendant was warm against Rangi's skin, and he could feel a subtle vibration emanating from it. Not quite sound, not quite sensation, but something that resonated in the deepest parts of his being. As he secured it around his neck, he felt a connection forming that stretched beyond the physical object to encompass something vast and eternal. "Remember," Kahu continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than any shout. The war that is coming will be fought on many levels. There will be battles for territory and resources, conflicts over political authority and cultural dominance. But beneath all of these surface struggles lies a deeper contest, a battle for the very soul of what it means to be Tangata Wenwa. Around them, the last of the gathering participants were making their final preparations for departure. Chiefs embraced in farewell, warriors clasped hands in promises of future alliance, and families prepared to separate once again after their brief reunion. Yet Rangi felt as if he and Kahu existed in a bubble of stillness at the center of all this activity, a space where time moved differently and words carried weights that would echo through generations. The colonial authorities believe they understand what they are conquering, Kahu said, his gaze fixed on the mountains that ringed the valley. They see land to be claimed, resources to be exploited, people to be governed according to their laws and customs. They do not comprehend that they are attempting to impose their will upon a living system that has existed in balance for countless generations. It turned back to Rangi, and in his eyes the young warrior saw depths that encompassed not just centuries of experience, but an understanding of existence that transcended the boundaries between life and death, between the physical and spiritual realm. Your role, Kahu continued, will be to help your people understand that this conflict is not just about political independence or cultural preservation. It is about maintaining the connection between the world of flesh and the world of spirit, between the realm of the living and the domain of the ancestors. If that connection is severed, we will lose more than our land. We will lose our very soul. As if summoned by his words, a flight of kaka burst from the trees at the edge of the valley, their echoes calls, creating a symphony that seemed to speak of journeys beginning and destinies unfolding. Kahu watched them with an expression of infinite tenderness, as if each bird carried within it a memory precious beyond measure. Go now, he said, his voice carrying a note of finality that suggested this particular conversation was ending. Carry the knowledge you have gained back to your people, but share it wisely. Not all are ready to understand the full truth of what walks among them. Reveal what must be revealed when it must be revealed, and trust in the wisdom of the ancestors to guide your choices. Rangi bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that encompassed not just the individual before him, but everything he represented, the accumulated wisdom of generations, the eternal vigilance of the guardians, and the unbreakable patience between the Māori people and the land that had shaped them. When it straightened, Kahu was already moving away, his figure becoming indistinct as he merged with the shadows between the departing groups. Within moments, he had vanished entirely, leaving only the faint scent of native flax, and something wild and untamed that spoke of deep forests and hidden valleys where the old ways still held sway. The journey home took Rangi 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime. Every step carried him further from the extraordinary events at the Wanganui, and deeper into a world that seemed somehow diminished by comparison. The pendant around his neck served as a constant reminder of what he had experienced, its subtle warmth, a tangible connection to mysteries that defied rational explanation. When he finally crested the ridge that looked down upon his home village, Rangi paused to gather his thoughts and prepare for the questions that would inevitably come. How could he explain what he had witnessed without sounding like a man touched by madness? How could he convey the urgency of the political situation without revealing the supernatural elements that had shaped the gathering's conclusions? As he descended toward the village, he noticed that his return had been observed. People emerged from their wares to greet him, their faces eager for news from the great gathering. Among them was his own chief, Tuertoa, whose weathered features reflected both welcome and concern. Rangi Tawerimatea, the chief, called out as he approached. You returned to us at a time when news travels faster than the wind itself. We have heard rumors of fighting in the north, of alliances being forged and war clouds gathering. Tell us what was decided at Wanganui. Rangi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the pendant against his chest, and drawing strength from its subtle warmth. The decisions made at the gathering will shape the future of all our people. He came, choosing his words carefully. But to understand their full significance, you must first understand that we face challenges unlike any our ancestors ever encountered. As I began to recount the events of the gathering, carefully editing his account, to focus on the political and military developments, while omitting the supernatural revelations, Rangi found himself thinking of Kahu's words about the battle for the soul of the Tangata when the war that was coming would indeed be fought on many levels, and he was beginning to understand that his role would be to help his people navigate not just the physical conflicts ahead, but the spiritual challenges that would ultimately determine their survival as a distinct culture. In the days that followed, as word of the gathering's decision spread throughout the Arawa territory and preparations for war began in earnest, Rangi found himself watching for signs of the guardian's presence. Sometimes he thought he glimpsed familiar figure at the edge of his vision, warriors who seemed somehow apart from their surroundings, elders whose wisdom appeared to transcend normal human understanding, children whose eyes held depths that belonged to beings far older than their apparent years. The pendant around his neck grew warm whenever these encounters occurred, confirming what he had begun to suspect, that the guardians were indeed revealing themselves to chosen individuals throughout Maori society, preparing for a more active role in the struggles to come. The age of hidden watching was ending, just as Kahu had promised, and the age of open guardianship was about to begin. As the months passed, and the conflicts with colonial authorities in Tensefal, Rangi came to understand that his experience at Te Wanganui had been more than just a political awakening. It had been an initiation into mysteries that would shape the rest of his life. He was no longer simply a warrior fighting for his people's independence, but a keeper of secrets that connected the immediate struggles of his generation to the eternal vigilance of beings who had watched over the Maori people since time immemorial. And sometime in the quiet moments between battles, when the weight of responsibility threatened to overwhelm him, Rangi would touch the pendant around his neck and remember the words of the timeless warrior who appeared in every old painting. The guardians will appear when and where they are most needed, regardless of the passage of time or the distance between places. In that promise lay both comfort and challenge, the assurance that his people would never face their darkest hours alone, and the understanding that he himself had become part of something far greater than his individual existence. The eternal watch continued, and he was now one of its keepers, bound by ties that transcended the normal limitations of mortal life, to preserve the connection between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit for generations yet to come. The gathering at Te Wanganui had ended, but its true significance was only beginning to unfold. In the years that followed, as the conflicts between Maori and colonial authorities escalated into full-scale war, the mysterious figures who had revealed themselves to chosen individuals would play increasingly important roles in shaping the destiny of their people. And at the center of it all, moving through history like a figure carved from legend itself, the warrior Kahu would continue his eternal vigil, appearing whenever the need was greatest, preserving the wisdom of the ancestors, and ensuring that the soul of the Tangata Wenyo would survive even the darkest of times. The story of the timeless warrior had become part of living history, no longer confined to old paintings and ancient carvings, but walking among the people as a guardian spirit made flesh. And in that transformation